Basically, my system that I developed and how that I view reality has a lot to do with what we call thought forms. So thought forms, to me, in my experience, are something overwhelming. It's something that you sense. And so when you get further along on the path and you develop clarity and you get the noise out, you see clearly what really exists. And just like Plato's allegory of the cave, that noise is like the cave with the crude reflections, right? So when you're outside of the cave, when your mind is clear and you've attained a degree of transcendence, what you sense are like those forms outside of the cave. You sense those pure, ideal forms, those platonic thought forms. And so I talk a lot about this because what we experience on the earth, and this is my grand thesis, and this also is it's reaffirmed in the Bhagavad Gita, the part where it's talking about how that human actions are tied to the tree, which has its roots in heaven and its branches down. So basically, my take is that our activity on the earth and every interaction that we have is reflected into the heavens, and vice versa. And so what's going on in our head when we're building our ideas of one another is we're patterning the matrix itself. We're patterning reality, which has this recursive looping system. So over time, when a person builds up their identity, which is not a static thing, it's a transitory magical illusion, which is always jostling, thought forms around identity are like they're like forms, they're like pieces in a chess game, or they're like parts of a beautiful painting. A landscape comes together as an aesthetic reality based on all of its component pieces. And likewise, our identities are comprised of all these different pieces, which come from our relationships, come from our upbringing. And essentially, these different parts of our identity, these components, are archetypal. You might have a relationship with your parents. You might have a particular relationship with your brother or sister. You might have had a particular type of relationship with your church, with your school, with the people that you go out with, your work, right? So all of these parts of ourselves are formed out of relationships, and they influence the decisions that we make and the people that we are. Now, the important part is like these things, none of them are real, right? If any one of those things is real, if any one of those personas that we adopt are really real, then none of them could be real. They're transitions, right? They're transition states. They're like filters that we put on. The mind itself is empty, and these filters that are assembled out of like relationships and out of moments in time which contain like the totality of all of experience filtered through this particular archetypal relationship. They're magical creations of the mind. Okay, they're not, and the mind, as it intakes all of this sensory information and prints it into this self image that we make based on our forms, right? As more forms come into our environment, our mind is generating these relationship archetypes out of just from the forms being in the environment. It's literally the gravitational impact of forms in our minds, which produces these archetypal relationships, and which are reflections of heaven, right? These are reflections of ultimate reality. These are reflections of timeless themes of our relationships with one another. So it's out of these archetypal relationships that we see the patterns of the universe. So let me just read here what's in my book, The Noosphere. Omnia vivunt, omnia inter se connexa. Everything is alive. Everything is interconnected. Cicero. The horizontal expression of consciousness is life. All of the diverse forms and their relationships to one another began as simple systems and evolved into higher and more complex ones. At the state at which we find ourselves, Homo sapiens, with a highly complex form enabling consciousness to become lucid and self-aware, the principle of form has sublimated to more than just a physical condition. As mentioned elsewhere in the book, our minds have a creative energy which interprets sensory information from the environment and reconstructs it as a picture in the mind. Coherence, which arises from the principle of self-awareness, happens when that mind receives such a sensory image and marks it by a demarcation of boundaries which define it as an object of cognition. It then draws on its memory to organize it within the context of the contents of the mind. When the mind is cognizant of such an object, it is actually reconstructing it. This is a thought form. Simple objects which are not conscious, such as a rock, form simple thought forms in our minds. Complex objects which are conscious form more complex thought forms, with which we have a more complex relationship. An object which is itself sentient and aware of us scrutinizing it, such as a human being, forms the most complex type of thought form with which we are capable of presently discerning. So that's my main thesis, is that we create each other in our own minds as thought forms. These type of subjective relationships between a complex thought forms cause complicated psychic entities such as the shadow and ego to arise. So just the fact of two humans existing in the same room just creates this archetypal mandala that we experience. So just the fact that you have humans, two human beings in the same room, you're going to get things that one person sees and another person represses. You're going to get desires and, so just the basic foundation of the fact that you have two human forms, conscious entities together in one another's minds is what creates the archetypal parts of our psyche and the things that we experience. Even when the physical object is not immediately present in our environment, we can recall the thought form in our relationship to it. For example, when we are hungry and desire a banana, our brain may receive some impulses from the body that it's short on potassium. The unconscious mind then dredges up the thought form of banana and seeks to actualize its desire by finding one to eat. This is a crude example of how thought forms with which we have simple relationships might possess us. Perhaps similarly, when the social homeostasis of the earth is in disarray, namely when our social archetypes are fucked up, it also summons up thought forms from its memory, the collective unconscious, in this way. When we have a highly developed psychic relationship with someone we miss, for example, like a romantic partner, and recall them in our minds, the cascade of associations in our psyche are certainly very complicated and speak to a more complex process of actualization. Indeed, that deep, most unconscious yearning for a partner seems to be the main driving impulse of life for self-actualization, to pass through the ultimate rite of passage, manifest itself completely through mutual revelation, and pass on its genes. So, right, when you have two people in the same room together, you have a soul inside which the other person can't see. So human experience is all about mutual revelation. We want to be known. We want to actualize what's in us and build reality together. And love, romantic love, is the ultimate expression of that. And it's a reflection of our relationship with God. We both create thought forms and are influenced by the thought forms or ideas generated by others. We both create thought forms and are influenced by the thought forms or ideas generated by others. Human consciousness then can be said to take place in a veritable mental battleground of thought forms. The complex roles which emerge out of the blueprint of our human society, formed by the relationships we have to one another and our ideas about them over human history, has given birth to the powerful thought forms which we call archetypes, which seem to have a life of their own. The wish-fulfilling nature of imagination, our desire to know and be known, and to express ourselves, has created those familiar archetypes which move the world on a grand scale through time, such as the conquering hero, the despotic warlord, the prophet, the explorer, the rock star, the innovator, the businessman. All of these are arrayed from the midst of the collective unconscious, which acts as a storehouse of past psychosomatic impressions which have generated the story of our human drama and made it coherent for us, like the changing room behind a playhouse stage. All of them present themselves as latent possibilities for the self-actualization of those millions of members of the human family who have millions of different environments and identities, but which fit into one human story. Each individual unit of awareness is connected to it and finds within it their serendipitous deployment of fate. Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, the originator of many popular New Age tropes such as the Omega Point, taught that with the generation of sentience in Homo sapiens, an entirely new world came into being called the noosphere, from Latin nous meaning intellect. Now we can think of this as a collective self-image of the earth and everyone on it on the mental plane. It's an entire dimension which contains the earth as it is reflected, experienced, and recreated in the minds of humans. Our influence on the noosphere can be likened to the influence of a cell on a human body. When we produce strong thought forms, we can influence the awareness of other humans. If those thought forms continue to aggregate, then they may produce a huge influence on the noosphere and take on a life of their own as an egregore, which may in turn possess more minds. An egregore is an autonomous psychic entity which is capable of producing world-changing effects on the earth. This is the life of thought forms. So we all saw this happen in 2016 with the meme egregore, which arose out of 4chan and then pushed swayed the presidential election in 2016. Those forms which exist on the noosphere are the grand puzzle of that human consciousness, which contains within it both the problems and solutions to sentience and the human condition. So I go over this in multiple places in the book, but I say that the point of humans, what we are, is that we represent the enigmas of sentience itself, and we try to reconcile the inherent contradictions with life, with existence. Like, for example, we can create whatever we want, right, in our minds, just like our dreams. What happens though when you have two sentient beings together? We have to resolve our differences, right, and create a consensual paradise together. One person can't just override what the other person says, right? So we have to come together in an archetypal way to wire our souls together to return to paradise. Perhaps one day we will resolve these problems as a whole, and humanity will evolve through the noosphere onto a pure spiritual existence. This is assuming, of course, that the higher thought forms of goodness prevail, and that the ideals of selfless love and wisdom draw together the unity of all mankind, and that those low-frequency thought forms of maliciousness and self-destruction born out of our alienation don't intervene first. In order for that New Jerusalem to manifest, we must first reconcile these paradoxes within us and through our karmic relationships on a microcosmic level. So that's the overall uptake of this book, is that every single karmic relationship you have, every relationship you have is actually one small piece in the puzzle of whether that we are going to all ascend into heaven or hell. Whether that we are all going to destroy ourselves, or whether that we can resolve these unconscious complexes we have and realize the unity of our souls, of non-duality in moment to moment, and ascend into paradise on the earth. Self-realization is simple. Self-actualization is complexity within complexity. Even more so, the actualization of the collective of humanity. So this is another theme in the book, self-realization versus self-actualization. I say that self-realization happens on the vertical axis and self-actualization happens on the horizontal axis. So all of us actualize in different ways, but ways which fit together, if that makes sense. So kind of, I believe kind of in a Neon Genesis Evangelion-esque way, that when you have the instrumentality of humanity, that our flaws will be complemented by each other's strengths. Like one person's weaknesses will be complemented by another person's strength. One person's role will fit into another person's role in an archetypal way in order to progress the human story to the New Jerusalem, to the ascension omega point where synchronicity kind of collapses on itself and everything becomes like revelatory. If you've listened to any Terence McKenna, he talks a lot about what I'm saying. We are born from parents with an archetypal blueprint encoded into our DNA and our unconscious minds, and a hardwired connection into the noosphere and the minds of others. This sets us out on a recursive journey where our free choices link us into a set system of patterns which define the human experience. Our human form began in a certain way, progresses in a certain way, and ends in a certain way. These are the boundaries of human life. Within that progression, there are rites of passage which determine whether the archetype of our being is successful or fails. Such gateways of validation are necessary to preserve the forms of life throughout time, and they are inescapable fail-safes to us as humans. Our psyche is endowed instinctively to feel content and successful, or like a miserable failure, based on whether we are correctly molded by these milestones inherent in the collective unconscious. So I talk a lot about validation in the book, which is the main thing that we concern ourselves with, like all day long. Validation, validation, validation. Nobody knows what the fuck is going on. Our successful integration ensures that our actualization, consensually attained via the minds of the collective, contributes to the good of the whole and the homeostasis of consciousness and life, and that the aesthetic truth of our goodness is passed on throughout the generations. Bear in mind that you, dear reader, are a vortex within a vortex, and this whole process is as much alive and responsive to your wishes and dreams as it is set in stone. The contradictions of the dual alienation within the psyche take the form of complexes, where the inner world of our consciousness and outer world of our life do not match. The resolution of these contradictions of the ego and its relationships, the attainment of a fulfilling life both internally and externally, form the focus of our narrative of unified self-realization and self-actualization. There is a lot of talk in modern times about achieving sustainability, but we don't see it yet, that we will not reach a homeostasis with the environment until we reach a homeostasis within our psyches and within our relationships to one another.